Good evening and welcome to Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, cruising into New Hampshire. With the Granite State's primary just days away, Senator Ted Cruz tries to build on his win in Iowa, holding a town hall this morning in Portsmouth that was covered live here on Newsmax TV. Miranda Kahn has more from our Newsmax Prime newsroom. Miranda?
J.D., Senator Cruz memorized the Constitution as a teenager, so it wasn't a surprise to hear him refer to that document and our Bill of Rights at this morning's town hall.
For 7 years, we've seen a federal government that is violating the Constitution, violating our right. Listen, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are not a rough draft. They're not suggestions. We need to defend all of the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, free speech, and especially religious liberty.
Another reoccurring theme, Ronald Reagan. Senator Cruz mentioned the former president at least 8 times during the town hall.
All across this country, millions of men and women rose up and became the Reagan Revolution. And it didn't come from Washington. Washington despised Ronald Reagan. It came from the American people, and it turned this country around. Why am I so optimistic? Because the same thing is happening again.
What Ted Cruz really wants to happen again is another first-place finish, this time in New Hampshire. But in 2 new polls, Senator Cruz is still in third behind Donald Trump and Marco Rubio. J.D., back to you.
Thanks, Miranda. For more on this story, we're pleased to be joined by the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Politistick.com. She's joining us via telephone from Mesa, Arizona. I refer, of course, to Jennifer Burke. And also Skyping in tonight from Northern Virginia, one of my dear friends in the conservative movement, Richard Viguerie. He wasn't quite president at the creation, but he was, quote, close, and currently he's the chairman of ConservativeHQ.com. Thanks to you both for joining us here on Newsmax Prime. Richard, we heard Ted invoke the name of Ronald Reagan a whole lot today at the town hall. That was not a mere coincidence, was it?
Not at all, J.D. It's interesting. I don't know if he made reference to it later, but Reagan's birthday will be in 2 days, so we'll all be focused once again on Ronald Reagan. And I think that Cruz is certainly the most conservative, serious, top-level candidate that we've had run for president since Ronald Reagan. We've had some good conservatives run since then, but they haven't been top tier. Cruz is, maybe has a 50-50 chance of winning. I think it's a two-way race, J.D. I think that within a few weeks now, we're going to see basically the vote divided between Rubio on the establishment candidate and Cruz, the conservative candidate.
And for purposes of full disclosure, we should note that Richard has announced his support for Ted Cruz, just so we have it out there. Jennifer, this morning at the town hall, Ted spent as much time on policy as he did on politics. He spoke extensively about ending Common Core, abolishing the IRS, and securing the borders. At least within the grassroots conservative movement, that message appears to be resonating.
Oh, it most definitely is resonating, and I would venture to say that even beyond the grassroots, Common Core is another element of an overbloated big government that's overly intrusive that has awakened a whole slew of people who might have felt unaffected by many of the other policies that the government has done. But I don't know if you've noticed, but you get on social media and parents are sharing these ridiculous assignments, disturbing assignments of their children. So Common Core has awakened a whole nother beast within the American people, not just necessarily the conservative grassroots.
And we heard that this morning. A mom crossed the state line, came up from Massachusetts to talk to Senator Cruz about her problems, sitting down and going over homework with one of her kids and the whole Common Core issue. Well, of course, politics was also part of the town hall, and the senator was asked about his ongoing feud with Donald Trump. Ted responded by saying, basically, he's not going to respond. Let's listen and get your opinion.
You know, my view of it is this is a job interview. And I don't think people are interested in temper tantrums. I don't think people are interested in insults and attacks. And so other candidates, Donald and others, have tossed more than a few nasty personal attacks my way. I can't control what they do, but I can control how I respond. And I have not responded in kind, and I do not intend to respond in kind.
Now, even as he said he really didn't want to respond, Ted Cruz put a new term in the political lexicon with that reference to Trumper tantrums. Is that going to stick and be effective against the Donald? Because he's got a substantial lead. It's tightened up some, but Donald's still in first in the polling there in New Hampshire.
I think it will, J.D., because quite frankly, Trump hasn't been attacked much. People are kind of afraid to attack him because he's so tough in his responses. Most of the political fire has been directed at other candidates there. But I think after Iowa, we've seen that he does bleed. Remember Kipling's story about the man who would be king, and he was like a god until he bled. And then when he bled, people say, well, he's not a god. And Trump has bled here in Iowa. And I think we're going to see a lot of attacks at him in a way that we haven't before. For example, the whole issue of his lifestyle, his culture, his views on morality. You know, we're all sinners, J.D. You are, I am, etc. But we don't brag about it. Trump brags about his sins, his adultery. And I think when that begins to become part of the political conversation, you're going to see his support collapse. I think it's a two-way race, quite frankly, between Cruz and Rubio.
Well, I will tell you, the Donald is a guy who in many ways is larger than life. And Jennifer, there's been some controversy that has been magnified and has seemed to take on a life of its own. You wrote about it at Politistick.com. The talk that when Cruz's campaign staff followed up on tweets and reports on CNN that Dr. Ben Carson was headed back to Florida after the Iowa caucus, some speculation the good doctor might be ending his campaign. Suddenly, there was a firestorm of criticism, Dr. Carson going after Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio trying to get in some licks as well, and of course, the aforementioned Donald Trump. Now, Jennifer, you've done some investigating into this. Indeed, as I mentioned earlier, you wrote about it at Politistick.com. What exactly was going on here?
Well, you know, I had seen it. First of all, the attacks. I don't know. This is an interesting tidbit. Carson is attacking Cruz in the media, but blaming CNN and not mentioning Cruz in fundraising. So I thought that was interesting. But you know, the onslaught of attacks against Cruz for this is ridiculous. I mean, that's what would happen if you catch wind that, I mean, someone flies across the country to get a change of clothing. So I noticed a tweet early in the day yesterday. Someone said, and this is a Rubio supporter, that Marco Rubio's campaign was also spreading the word that Ben Carson was out of the race and trying to get the votes. And I kept that story up on my computer. So as I was making dinner later that night, I saw Marco Rubio on Fox News with Megyn Kelly taking a jab at Ted Cruz, not naming him, but we all knew who he was talking about, saying that you'll never find him lying about another candidate to try to get votes. And I thought back to that tweet. So I went to the person who tweeted it, went to his Twitter feed to find the link to the tweet, to send it to a friend and to my husband Matthew, just to say, hey, tell them what had happened. So I found the tweet at 7:29. Marco spoke at about 7:15ish. Sent it to my friend. 7:30, she tried to open it, and that tweet was gone.
Ah, yes,
thought,
the old tricks.
That's really odd.
It's
Very
more
odd.
than odd.
So I wrote about that.
Yes, you did, and Rush Limbaugh, among others, picked it up. That's why we wanted to talk to you about it tonight. Richard Viguerie, you were the maven of direct mail, and now we've seen this social media explode. Everyone tweeting, all the Twitter in the Twitterverse. You don't think this was a dirty trick, do you? This is just an example of a story getting ahead of itself. Do you think any campaign had some sort of notion of acting badly against another candidate?
You know, I would not attribute bad motives to anybody unless there were some a lot more evidence than we've seen here. You know, this is in a campaign where everybody's like a one-armed paper hanger right now. I mean, everybody's going 90 miles an hour, working with little sleep, just around the clock. And these things happen. It happens on the Democrat side, the Republican side. So I wouldn't attribute any negative motives unless we had a lot more evidence than what we have now.
Before we go, about 40 seconds, and Richard, I need to get your opinion on Rick Santorum and his endorsement of Marco Rubio. That surprised a lot of people within the grassroots conservative movement. Were you surprised?
I was, and disappointed. I think that it was unnecessary. I think that you know, it says more about Santorum than it does about anybody else. I think that he may be figuring he has a better shot at a cabinet position with Rubio than he does with Cruz. And it was, I think it's going to disappoint a lot of his supporters out there. And, you know, Rick has a reputation of being more of an establishment. He was in the Republican Senate leadership. So I think more establishment candidates are moving towards Rubio, and the conservatives will be left with Cruz.
Understood. We will have to leave it there. Richard Viguerie via Skype from Virginia and Jennifer Burke via telephone from Arizona. Folks, you have our thanks. Newsmax Prime will continue with more right after this.